I first chatted with you for the podcast in maybe 2017,
Something
early
like that.
2017, something like that, because you were getting ready to play the featured recital opening solo at ISB 2017. It's so great to have you here in San Francisco. And thanks for coming to San Francisco, Sam.
Yeah, and thanks for hosting me. And it's great to see the studio. And it's such a beautiful place to be.
We were just at the School of the Arts, and Sam was coaching the bass students on this Vivaldi ensemble they're going to be playing this weekend for the Bass Bash. And then at the end, which is great, and talking and getting them moving. And then at the end, you take out the bass you're playing this week and start playing your Daft Punk Chaconne. And just to watch, and I've seen you do this before, and I've seen people's reaction before, whether it's the YouTube video or in person, but just to watch. And I know these students, just to see them like realize the possibilities of the bass. It was pretty cool.
Thank you. They're really fun kids to play for. And like, I think that's sometimes my favorite audience is like people who've never heard anything quite like this, but also understand physically like how challenging the instrument can be, and trying to show what's possible and do something cool. I think they really seem to engage with it, and it's weird. Sometimes my favorite performances are those like really informal things, because the audience is they're there for like. You really have them in the palm of your hand in a way that sometimes even someone who's paid for a ticket isn't necessarily going to be as engaged.
That piece I have, and that YouTube video I've pointed people to so often as an example of, you think you understand what the bass can do, but check this out. And I was actually just sitting across this exact table about a month ago with Mark Dresser. Speaking of somebody he was in town playing Keys Jazz Bistro a few blocks from here. And so talk about somebody who's like dedicated his career, or a big portion of it, to exploring what the bass can do. You think you know what 4 strings in an acoustic form can do, and then you hear what he's exploring. And I definitely think of you in that same category. And just watching you like explore with the students just an hour ago, kind of reminded me of you really have this ability to pull people in with the just kind of like the magic of what the bass can do.
Yeah. And Mark is such a huge influence. I seen him at ISB in 2009, like do some things I did. Yeah, he really broke open where I was like, oh, the bass can make that sound, and you can produce harmonics that way. And it's funny because years later, I had a lesson with him, and it was on a piece that I had commissioned, and I had commissioned the piece and shown him Mark's work, and I was like, this is a cool technique, right, for this. And so I played it for Mark, and it was like in the score, it's like a la Mark Dresser. And he's like, how are you doing that? And I'm like, I thought this is how you make those flautando harmonics. He's like, no, I do it like this. And he played it, and he executes it in a totally different way. And it was such a weird moment because, part of that inspiration is like there's a gap between, you don't know how someone does that thing, but you see it, and then you're like, okay, I'm going to try to get there. And then you end up, in this case, like I kind of forged a very different technique to accomplish the same goal. And so anyhow, I love him, and, so appreciative of what he's doing for the bass and pushing forward.
The reason why he kind of went off on the journey he did, and I never realized this, was he was playing in the San Diego Symphony, and they went on strike. And so he said, well, I've been meaning to go to New York City and try some things out, so I think I'll go there until this strike's done. And then he looked up and 10 years had gone by. It was on a totally different path.
I didn't know that. That's amazing.
You were just talking to the students at the School of the Arts and how piano was a big part of your background. Did you start on piano?
Yeah, it was my first instrument. I used to, in Buffalo, I would go down to the Illos piano shop and take 30-minute lessons with Joe Brancato for... I think when I was like in kindergarten, I started, and but he thought I was in like 3rd grade, so he started me on a couple books ahead. So I always had a little bit of a snowball momentum going with that, and I always appreciated that. Yeah, so I studied with him and a few other jazz pianists in Buffalo. That was like my main instrument before I picked up bass, and I still accompany my students on recitals, and I love, actually, probably like one of my favorite things is doing collaborative piano. Because the notes are all there, and you don't have to worry about playing in tune, and it's it's really fun.
I'm amazed at how few bassists I've talked to for the podcast, at least, that do have an extensive piano background. I know Susan Cahill has a strong piano background, Mark Morton, but most people that's not the typical path. At least of the people I've chatted with. Maybe I'm talking to the wrong people. But how did you discover? Was bass next for you in terms of instruments?
No, I did the piano lessons on the side, and then when I got into the public school system, fourth grade, I started on cello. So I picked up the cello. All I wanted to do was play Wipeout, and my dad fashioned like a little piezo pickup. He's an engineer, and he made a little pickup, and we puttied it onto the bridge so I could play Wipeout on the morning announcements. And that was like what I really wanted to do. And so then I ended up in middle school switching from cello to bass because I wanted to do more jazz and improvised stuff. And and my dad plays guitar, jazz guitar, not professionally, but so there were just kind of opportunities in the family to make music together when I switched from cello to bass. I did that. I made that switch I guess, when I went to middle school.
How did you end up at Northwestern? And I also went to Northwestern. My wife went to Northwestern. How did Northwestern get on your radar? And what were you thinking you were going to be doing as you were heading there?
Well, it's funny. I was dating a girl at the time who wanted to be a theater actor, and she's like, "Oh, I got to go to Northwestern." And so I was like, "I've never heard of this school. I should check it out." And so I applied, thinking that, maybe we'll go to the same school. And I kind of really fell in love with the teacher. Peter Lloyd was there at the time, and she ended up not even going there. I ended up going there, and I had a kind of a mixed background. I wanted to pursue engineering, chemical engineering, and do a double degree because I was that kind of nerd in high school. I love chemistry, and I still do. And so I wanted a double major, and then I ended up there, and then kind of detouring and doing a performance degree. And then midway through, there was some turnover with the faculty, and I ended up switching from a performance degree to a theory degree. And the theory program there, it's a music theory and cognition, really interesting courses. I got to work with PhD students while I was an undergrad and some really brilliant people. So it was really fun. I remember going to class over at the music administration building, and which is so well named. And I was going to class, and I didn't have the bass with me, and I was contributing in these conversations about music theory, and it was kind of a moment where I was like, I don't need the bass in my hands to be a valuable human being in this field. And so I really loved music theory, and I ended up getting a degree in it, and working with some really cool faculty while I was there. I kind of pivoted from engineering away to performance, and then from performance into theory, which has helped a lot, in my teaching and everything since then. And I was the only one in the entire undergraduate class that actually had a theory degree. I think there was maybe one other person who had a musicology degree, but it was kind of not something I had intended on when I started there.
Which is surprising because I remember wonderful experiences in the theory department. I think Candace Brower, if I'm remembering, we're going back a few decades for me, but I remember having her as a teacher, and my wife, who also went to Northwestern, started off not engineering, but she was music performance and astrophysics. So she had a little bit of that. This is getting deep into Northwestern, but there's this North Campus, South Campus kind of divide, like people who went up to tech, where a lot of these classes were, they're not necessarily going down to Regenstein, to where the practice rooms were. And then there was also very much, and I'm sure your case too, where that music administration building, it's like something out of the movie Brazil, was named, and then where the performance part of campus was, they're separated by this vast chasm of the rest of campus. So there really was a kind of academic music, maybe the wrong term, and then performance music divide, and a lot of people didn't bridge that divide. I remember when I was there for my undergraduate, seeing a notice that Robert Black was performing, but he wasn't performing over at the performance side. He was performing for the composition majors. And I was the only bass student who went to this. And I think my goodness, it's Robert Black, bang on a can, failing all the other things. And so it's really cool that you were able to tap into these different parts of that school, which are all excellent. And I remember when I first learned about that with your background, I remember thinking like, oh, wow, that's an unusual path. But then getting to know your music more, I thought like, I see the logic of that path and where you went after that.
Yeah. And, my philosophy was like, how many keys can I get?
Mhm.
And like, there was a point where I was taking harpsichord lessons with, I forget the teacher's name, but I was taking some organ lessons. I had a friend who was getting married and he's like, can you play organ at the wedding? And I was like, yeah, so I guess I'll take some lessons. So I took a semester of organ lessons, and that got me a key to this little organ practice room. And it was just kind of nice to kind of unlock different rooms. It felt like a video game or something while I was there. But yeah, it was difficult. I mean, looking back, you're like, oh, well, I could have stayed. I could have finished my chemical engineering degree and just weathered it out, and leveraged that in life. Another point. But there's just so much. There's only so much time, and I loved biking up to the North Campus, but the students there didn't really understand what I was going through. That like I have to practice 3 hours a day, 4 hours a day, or whatever. And then the people at the music building didn't always understand, like, oh, you have lab, what's lab? So it was an interesting mix. But yeah, I really enjoyed that kind of flexibility. But then once I dropped the chemical engineering, it opened up my schedule. And then I had I took a Renaissance poetry class and a film class on German history and like all these other interesting things that I really loved and like got to explore. I think that was like, I'm so glad that things worked out the way they did because I was able to explore these other classes and work with some of the theory faculty there that are really world class that I maybe wouldn't have, you're in that like 101 class with a professor who's written the book and you don't realize it because it's a 101 class. And then, you realize, oh, they wrote the book and I need to be in this class. So it was a good transition to make. But, it was a long time ago now.
Yeah, but it's crazy how those foundations that you lay and what ends up becoming a long time ago, how they continue to this point. And I remember the pre-med majors when I was in my undergrad. I just never saw them, So like just opening up your schedule is such a beautiful thing. And there are many good schools to go to, but we both went to Northwestern, so I have similar memories of. I took a Roman civilization class. It was like a 101 type of class, but it was completely amazing. And I had some of my favorite experiences and things that I actually think I've carried with and applied in life were in some of those 6 required electives outside of the music school that you had to take, and taking advantage also not only of Northwestern, but I believe just taking advantage of Chicago. You were in the civic orchestra too at least for a period of time, right?
Yeah, I was juggling. I was principal there for 2 years during my junior and senior year, which was like a huge responsibility. Like I kind of fell into a leadership role there that I wasn't really prepared for. But Cliff Colnott, rest in peace, was a big advocate, and so I had that amazing experience of actually working and seeing what that job might look like, and taking the train, just taking the Purple Line to Howard and taking the Red Line all the way, and then I was telling you in the car earlier, like I eventually wised up to learn about the Metro train, where you could, if you finish rehearsal at 10 and you run, you can catch the 10:30 train from Ogilvy. But if you really hustle, you can make it to the Popeyes and pick up a biscuit for the train ride home before they close. So yeah, it was really fun to run and catch the Metro train. I gave that wheel a real workout.
Yeah.
Should have probably had some snow tires or something. But
well, I remember those civic days. I was doing my master's at Northwestern at the point, but I remember before I was in civic, watching people that got done with Northwestern University Symphony Orchestra, NUSO. Haven't thought about that acronym in a while. And then you have just enough time to hoof it over the train and catch it to get to your 7 p.m. rehearsal. Or I drove sometimes, but then you just sit in traffic on the way to your 7 p.m. rehearsal and pay for parking for your rehearsal. But boy, I look back at some of the experiences I had while I was in civic, and they're really and I've done a lot since then, but they're really some cornerstone memories in my life. I mean, Rostropovich conducted us while we were there. Barenboim was conducting and took us on tour to New York City, and we did a week-long residency at Carnegie Hall, and it was tiring, but really important experience for me. And it's cool that you had that in your
Yeah,
background
it
too.
was amazing, and to be on that stage, I don't know, there's nothing quite like it,
Hmm.
and so I had a great time, and I learned to like. Well, part of the reason I switched to the theory degree was so I would have a little more time in my schedule. Didn't have as many I didn't have orchestra requirements anymore, so I was able to kind of practice in the afternoon and then go to rehearsal. And yeah, there used to be a pot belly on the corner there, and I would go up real early and drop the bass at the hall, say hi to the timpanist, who was always also like 2 hours early, and then I'd go to pot belly. I'd warm up and then go to pot belly, get a sandwich, and come back and rehearse until 10. And it was a real like, uh, making the schedule work was tough. But it's something like when I went to the school, they kind of advertised like, oh, there's this opportunity that you could play in this orchestra. And it's not as easy as it seems as an undergrad, but it was definitely fun and worth it.
Oh yeah, and I know that exact pot belly you're talking about. I played many a gig at Symphony Center over the years, and I would usually park my car in Grant Park South and get the bass into the hall, go to pot belly, go do whatever it was I was doing for that week. And so you're playing in this orchestra, playing principal, so leading this, playing. I'm sure all the some combination of Brahms and Beethoven and contemporary music and all that stuff. Working with Cliff Colnett, who was an influence in my time in Civic and other places. But you look at what you're doing now, or what I know you for, and it's not necessarily in that orchestral box. So what was your mindset maybe those last couple of years at Northwestern? I know you ended up at Yale. What did you think you were going to? What did you see in the
Yeah.
future for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I loved orchestra playing, and I still do enjoy it. And I hit a point where, from doing Civic, I kind of learned what the schedule was like and how exhausting it is. And, it's a little bit in the box. Like you're doing an art, but it doesn't necessarily feel creative. And so when I arrived in grad school, I was still kind of thinking like orchestra it's the job. And but when I got to Yale, it was like the focus was on contemporary music, chamber music, and kind of like being creative. I was hanging out with a lot more composers and people outside of music as well, in the art school and the drama school. And so it was an interesting transition that's like, oh, there's this other side of things. And there's somewhat of, not I wouldn't say the pipeline, but a lot of the students there kind of move into New York and freelance and follow careers that aren't just like try to go win a job and define your life by that job. It was just a lot more piecemeal stuff. And so I ended up finding that kind of versatility and creativity and like being able to do different things was a lot more interesting to me. Don Palma was my teacher, and I loved Don. And there were just days where he would say like, you're too creative to be an orchestra player. You should do other things. And it's, you can be creative and an orchestra player, but I know that with that kind of schedule, it's very hard to make time for other things. And it's a great gig. And like, Peter used to tell me like, your entire life is planned out for you. Your tours are planned out. Your bags are, your case is packed for you and loaded. Like they give you the itinerary, you just follow. And that can be a great way of living. But as an artist, I wanted to be able to do a lot of different things. And I didn't feel that was like worth kind of only focusing on orchestral music and like trying to grind out an audition when I felt like I could contribute other things and create a niche in some other ways. So that's kind of how I transitioned from that. And I play with freelance groups and sub occasionally with orchestras, and it's really rewarding. But yeah, I'm like, this is exhausting. And now I don't, it's hard to tell. Is it getting older or is it the pandemic?
Mm-hmm.
Where I'm like, is this long COVID or am I just aging? And I'm thinking like an 8 p.m. rehearsal or an 8 p.m. this just sounds exhausting. So I'm kind of happy that the things I'm chewing on now are mostly chamber music and stuff that's we don't have to rehearse in the evenings.
Yeah, those evening rehearsals, and it might be partially aged, but I too feel the fatigue of the break, and you come back and it's like 8:45 p.m. My goodness, so you just so eloquently expressed a sentiment that I try to get across. The there is orchestral music mini, not rant, but just divergent. Like orchestral, obviously this is an art, and you're seeing, Beethoven wrote the symphony, you're part of it, but you're kind of part of a team, and there's artistry happening. But if you're being creative in the bass, like I like to say, if I'm being creative subbing in the San Francisco Symphony bass section, that's my last subbing opportunity in the San Francisco Symphony bass section. That's true for the people that are members there too. And yes, you have time to be creative, but it is demanding of your energy, your resources, your time, your bandwidth. And I've also thought and for what it's worth, maybe not much, I remember going to auditions as I was getting increasingly burned out and looking at this room of people that has been spending days, weeks, months, years practicing the same dozen excerpts. And I would think, what if they took all that energy and did anything else with it? And you're such a great example to me of like, what could you do? What could you explore? Whose minds could you open? How could you be an ambassador for this instrument in ways that are just so maybe like barely trodden, And so I think there are many different satisfying career paths, but I'm thrilled you went down the path that you
Thank you.
have gone down.
Well, and part of it's also like, there's the activity at the margins, and if we can kind of push those margins wider, it makes more room for like the center of it to be interesting and creative. And, so I feel like even if I'm not, doing an orchestral career, like by kind of pushing the boundaries of what the bass can do, it's hopefully going to help open up some other opportunities in the long run. And, when you work with composers and you're kind of like showing them that this instrument can be a lot more than just, boom of the boom chick. And, then you end up, I think, hopefully creating opportunities down the line for the instrument. And it feels like a little bit more, it's hard to say, like, what's a mission? Like, what's my mission as a player? But it feels a little better when you're talking about, a mission of expanding what the instrument can do rather than just trying to be the best at playing that excerpt on that day. And, lightning striking and all the things. And so, and I see a lot of friends who play in orchestras who sometimes they just wish they could do more creative things. And I see this too with violinists, and, my violin colleagues oftentimes, like, they wish they were bass players, because we kind of have a little bit, I think we have more permission to do creative things and treat the instrument in an unconventional way, or the violin seems to have been gamed out. And, they're a little bit jealous of us, actually, which I think is ironic.
There's something you expressed to me in that 2017, that first time we chatted for the podcast, about how you think about programming. And it actually took me back just right now to my Northwestern, like, music theory, Schenkerian kind of map. Like you definitely, at least at the time, and maybe you're thinking on it has changed, but you have this sort of meta approach to a program where you I think you talked about arranging a program like you might think of a suite. And I absolutely saw that at the Bradetich competition. And there was like down to drama, and just like there was this whole story, this whole form that was being created. Do you still think about that when you're putting together a program? Okay.
Well, and I think part of it's like, you don't take for granted that the audience is engaged, and that, like, this happens all the time with traditional chamber music, where you finish the first movement and the audience is like so excited, they start applauding. You know what I mean? And yet there's a few people who are like, it's not time, don't do it. But there's like this natural energy that's like, yes, it's time to applaud. And for me, a lot of times, like, programming is kind of seeing those moments and saying, like, hey, maybe we program in a way that there's no artificial suppression of the excitement of the audience. We want to try to assemble things in an order that not necessarily just resembles, like, we have to do the first move, second move, third move, with silence in between. And part of that's like, we can fit more pieces on programs and more voices if you do smaller bite-sized things. So oftentimes that is still something I'm thinking about in programming, how to put together more voices on stage, because we can play shorter pieces, or we can kind of just orient things around the audience's experience and kind of their first guttural reaction to the piece. So yeah, and oftentimes I will kind of assemble things almost as a suite. Sometimes it's because, there's that sense of nothing new under the sun. And so you can kind of put two things side by side that maybe someone in the audience is going to say, oh, I never saw a connection here, and here's a connection. And that feels useful in a way that, going to see a Beethoven symphony complete is amazing, and it's profound, and it's like, I just saw Dune, and you look at the credits, or there's like 6,000 people that worked on that thing to like, I don't know the exact numbers, but it felt like reading the credits. I watched the whole credits, and like, it's an unbelievable number of people to create such an awesome piece of art. And I feel the same way about like Beethoven 9. But, we're also sometimes not thinking about the kind of the audience's experience moment to moment in that type of thing. And especially for a recital where you're trying to really capture attention the whole time. Sometimes when I go to see a Beethoven symphony, I might kind of check out, and I might start doodling on the program and thinking about my laundry list of anxieties and things I have to take care of when the concert's over. And I'm hoping with the recital like that no one ever gets that feeling, and that they can be totally engaged the whole time. It's probably not possible, but I try. And I think part of that's contrast. Contrast is like, such a instinct. And so creating lots of contrast in the program, having some continuity, thinking a lot about when do you speak, and when do you let the music speak for itself, and then kind of trying not to spend too much of the audience's stamina. During pandemic, I spent a lot of time playing Breath of the Wild. And I don't know if you've ever played Breath of the Wild.
No.
Oh man, it's so good. But the character Link has a stamina gauge. And so if you run, it depletes. And so like it's this little green wheel, and it depletes. And in my mind, I'm like, the audience has this stamina wheel. And if I'm just like expecting them to follow me on everything, like this happens with excerpts too. If you like take too much rubato, or if like the tempo kind of is, like a broken machine or something, then they're spending stamina to catch up with you. And so I kind of imagine like I need to program in a way that preserves as much stamina as possible from the audience, because they get utterly fatigued. And if it's the same thing for too long, they're, and that can be meditative. It's like, that's when you listen to Philip Glass, I think he spends that stamina to put you in a state of like blissful meditation. But for a recital program where you're trying to engage, hopefully throughout, you want to kind of take care of that stamina as if it's a real, like it's a bar that you can see. So that's kind of where I'm thinking with the programming. And so for this recital coming up, I'm doing, it's not as much like kind of that suite style, since I'm trying to hit a little more variety of pieces. I feel like as a performer and a composer, I kind of have to, my work isn't done until everyone's heard the pieces 6 times, and so there's certain ones that I play almost every show. So I'll be playing some of my Daft Punk Chaconne as an opening, which I always feel is a good way to kind of, it makes audiences think, oh, I didn't know the bass could do that. There are other ways of perceiving this instrument other than a big cello. And so hopefully it's kind of an opening of their perspective. And then I'll be doing my Concerto After Haydn, just the slow movement and the first movement, kind of second movement, first movement, which is a recreation of Haydn's Lost Bass Concerto, which was actually a project. It was my senior thesis at Northwestern with Robert Yurdigan as an advisor. So I've been playing that for a long time, and I love that piece, and it's still evolving. But kind of, the thought with this music is like, it's all stuff probably, unless you've been to a show before of mine, like it's stuff you've never heard before. So, the Daft Punk, it's my own piece. The Concerto After Haydn, it's my own piece, but it's in a model composition, so it's this older style. So it sounds old, but it's new. And that gives you a really unique opportunity to kind of create an experience that's unique and treat the music like it's a living thing. And we don't have to kind of go to the corpse and like breathe life back into it, it's still alive and it still changes. Every performance is a little different. And then after that, I'll be premiering a piece by Chris Rogerson called Arietta. And this is a new arrangement of it for solo bass that I've created with him. And we went to high school together. It's been really cool. Like he's had this amazing career as a composer, working with young concert artists, and he teaches at Curtis now. And I've always admired his like work, and really excited to collaborate on this piece. But it's a very beautiful piece. It's like unaccompanied Bach, but a little Renaissance-y, a little bit Americana, super resonant, and really excited to share that. And so that'll kind of be, you eat your steak and your potatoes, and that one is like a little bit like what do they call them? The middle course.
Sure.
And a little espresso or something. And then I'll be doing a brand new piece that I wrote. This will be the premiere. It's called The Beehive. And it's, I'd written a piece for ISB for their solo competition a few years ago called Apple Tree. And I kind of imagine that as becoming a suite. So I've been writing more movements over the years. And so this is another movement for that. And it'll be fun eventually, like the piece. If you play Apple Tree, there's a moment in the piece where, if you can envision the tree, like the branch just snaps. And I thought, okay, well, usually if you're writing a suite or something like that, people think of it like it's chronological. This happens and then this happens. I was like, what if there's like a meanwhile piece? Meanwhile, like in that tree, when the branch cracked, there was a beehive. And so this is kind of, it takes a little bit of like point of departure from that piece, and spins off into this other thing that's investigating, for me, like kind of the geometry of the beehive, as well as like the kind of almost quasi-religious, like the dance of the bees. And so yeah, it's pretty fun, kind of scherzo-esque piece. Really excited to be joined by Liz Dorman for our first collaboration on that. And you use some extended techniques, and it's one of those pieces where I feel bad giving it to the pianist, because I've been playing it on piano for a year now, and the process was like I played it until I figured out exactly kind of the form of it all, and then I recorded it with a click track and transcribed it and put it all together. But the bass part is mostly just slash notation, because I'm not fully improvising, but I know like this happens here and this happens there, but it's too time consuming sometimes to write it out, what the bass is doing, until I perform the piece a few times. Because I feel like, it won't really be clear what I want the piece to be until it has some performing legs. So I feel like, after I've got a performance this week and next week of the piece, and then it's like, okay, now I'm going to see, did that work? Did this work? Do I want to change things a little bit? So it's a premiere, but like the bass part is just slash notation. And then I'll end the set with, that piece is roughly in B. And so I'll end the set then with the Samuel Coleridge Taylor Variations in B minor. We might go Attacca. We probably won't.
Okay.
I might discuss it, but it's a really gorgeous piece, originally for cello and piano. A set of variations. I liked it originally because like it sounds like Puccini, but it's chamber music, and like we don't get to do that very much. And the harmonic world is so rich, and like lots of ninth chords and really heavy chromaticism that you don't find in Bottesini. But it's also nice because the piece, it doesn't have arpeggios, it doesn't have any kind of double stops. It doesn't feel very cellistic, if that's even a word. So it translates very well to bass. And so I'm really excited. I've played it a few times, but it's, again, like you don't really feel like you know the piece until you played it a bunch. So I'm just really excited to play that one. But the whole thing kind of fits together. It's like, that's another piece that I don't know if there's even a recording of it online yet, of the complete thing. And so people haven't heard it. People haven't heard the Beehive. The Beehive is going to sound a lot more like Tigran Hamasyan. Like it's groovy, but it's new. And the Concerto after Haydn, it's new, but it sounds old. So none of it's familiar. And I find as a performer that by playing repertoire that people don't know, it's not burdened with the expectations that like, this is how Bottesini is played. This is how this is played. And so you feel like by playing that repertoire, your voice can be exposed in a way that it's not just a race to like fill up, play with good intonation, good projection, like good phrasing. Like those things are fine, but I actually have to sell the piece because the piece no one has agreed that this piece is cool. Like it's only cool if I play it in a way that makes people think it's cool. So it's like, it feels like it's a challenge. It feels like it's a responsibility. I feel like I have to advocate for Chris and his music and for my own music. But it gives me permission in a way that, again, like returning to us talking about orchestral stuff, it's like, you don't really get that opportunity in orchestral work to kind of be an advocate for the music. You're doing it by committee, and that's fine. And that's really important. But as far as like, the kind of the creative act where you feel totally responsible for the success or failure of the piece itself, doing contemporary music, doing things that are unknown, it's really, really rewarding. So that's what I'm really excited about for this show.
Well, I can't wait. I'm so glad to see you out here and to get a chance to hang out and see you work with the students earlier. And I'm going to go catch some of your rehearsal in a little bit here. And it's great to have you here in San Francisco. And it's great to be able to bring you up to North Beach for a hang.